happy to take questions or hear about what brought you here tonight or what you're struggling with in the structures that you work within, even if they're distinct from any of those that we presented on tonight. Or just to consider the field of folklore and how we might work together to make structures. Chris?
Hello, I feel like I'm on trial or something. So I have a question, maybe this goes to Andy or all of you. So I was trying to imagine this idea of I'm always imagining asking the question, why does my current boss make more than me? But that's for other reasons. But I was wondering, yeah, that's right. But in my particular job, I mean, I have a particular set of skills, and I'm thinking about my colleagues, and they represent a certain set of skills like communications or very administrative. But if you were to level the playing field and say everybody makes the same amount of money, but say my colleague doesn't know how to write that NEA grant or doesn't know how to do the 30 hours of field work or edit video that needs to go to the NEA, how do you level that skill playing field so that I could really go to bed at night feeling like I get why that person makes exactly the same as me, because I think it's a great idea, but actually laying out those hours of work and those skills. That's my question. Is that clear? Is that
I got no idea. I mean, that's
yeah.
to be honest. I mean, and the truth is that with us, I mean, we have 4 staff members who earn around the same amount. And whatever. I also think sort of Americans' concern about letting people know how much we make is silly. We all earn in the neighborhood of $45,000 a year. Those are the primary programming people. I don't work a full week, but if I did, I work 30 hours, but my 100% FTE would be around that. We have a development woman who earns substantially more if she were full-time, because we would not be able to hire someone to do that job at our sort of set rate. We have an administrative assistant who earns substantially less. And what we've been doing is trying to gradually increase what he earns with the hope of kind of reaching a point of parity. Because the thing is, like, the administrative guy, frankly, does most of the work, but is paid the least, right? And that kind of sucks, the sad thing, I mean, and answers I'm thinking of earlier is, how can we afford to pay these salaries? We are fortunate that folklore is so desperate for work. So very few people who've applied for jobs have balked at like that what we afford to pay them, but I mean, frankly, like when Greg Sharrow was hired with the skills he had and all the work he did, his salary was really low. When I was hired, it was really low. And it took years to sort of build it up because there's a notion of, there's a notion that that's where you can control cost. But to answer your question, I mean, and for me, it's like an ethical imperative, right? I mean, it's weird to me, to think we're going to bring in someone to be the director, and because that person has that title, they are therefore entitled to earn more than everybody else, but at the same, there's a corollary, right? Which is that job kind of sucks. Like when you lay it out. So if you're going to be the one wallowing in the suck, maybe I should, that's the back and forth of it. But, and once again, this is more like, it's like, this discussion occurs on a philosophical level because there's practical stuff to consider. I mean, like ideally, we would prioritize employee pay to a level that we felt was fair, that didn't compromise our ability to fulfill our mission and to complete our programs, right? Like those are sort of the 3 factors that you have to balance. And like the unfortunate part is that the place where there's an ability to move a lever up and down is salary. But, I mean, we've had discussions when we did our last hires, which were like, what if they try to negotiate? And it's like, we will tell them there is no leeway. Right. And some job applicants, when we told them what the pay was, they were like, oh, thanks. And, we didn't hear from them anymore. So,
At PFP, we're working towards leveling all salaries. And I guess some of the complexities have also particularly been around people who work with the money. But I think around like the skills, I mean, there's the part of like the burden of directing the organization, the liability, the, you know, some of the administrative tasks are, I think, the responsibility that comes with it, that I can sometimes say, oh, well, I wish I could make a couple $1,000 more just for signing my name on this line. But what we're really trying to do is have everybody at full-time employees make a base of 50,000, and then to consider tenure, to consider grant writing and sort of people's ability to bring in money for the programs that they're working on. I think that's a big burden to a lot of employees. So we try to be nuanced about where we hover around that line, but also like we're both working in such small institutions and can really say that the people who are working in the different capacities like that we have at the Folklore Project, which is really public programs, education, and then someone like me who straddles those two and then does the administration, that we're all experts at what we do. You know, what kinds of expertise that's needed to implement that work is varied, but we're all experts, and so people are paid for their expertise. And I found inspiration for making that decision through an organization called AS220 up in Providence, Rhode Island, where Umberto Crenshaw, who's the director, when we went on a tour of that organization, I think as part of an American Folklore Society meeting a number of years ago, as well as the Association of American Cultures was in, the meeting was in Providence, and also got to see the organization. And then he talked about how everybody from the janitorial staff to the director make equal pay. The waiters, they have a restaurant there, equal pay everyone. And one of the major issues that we discussed at that time was just really what does that look like for when you're making grant applications, right? Like what do people who don't understand the value system that is structuring your infrastructure, how do you explain that? I find myself very self-conscious when I'm putting in, you know, how much the director makes, what percentage of the salary in this line, and it's all the same all the way across, and saying, well, does my budget that's supposed to be a narrative of my institution reflect the values of the institution that I'm applying to and trying to appeal to? And it definitely is working more towards reflecting the values of my own leadership style, but that's a worry that I have constantly. So far it hasn't come up.
Just the last thing that I would add to that, I mean, working with local learning, which is an even smaller organization, you know, something that we've been doing is looking at the grants that we write and the ways that we structure our projects and our programs, is to look at kind of this, I mean, in some ways it goes to expertise, is looking at line items like, okay, so field work, program development, you know, administration, website development, and how much would you pay a full-time equivalent in each of those, and then what percentage do the two staff people put into those two, and that's kind of how we've been divvying it out, which is another way to kind of to look at that, especially when, you know, as we are pretty much fully reliant on grants, it makes it really easy because we're already kind of putting that out there, and that gets us away from having to say, you know, this person is working for X dollars, this person's for X dollars. It's more like, okay, this person's working on, you know, website development and editing and field work, and so this is their package salary then based on these line items. So that would be another way to kind of think about it in terms of expertise, and that different level, different kinds of things like field work might require a different kind of salary level than grant writing or development.
And I think the common strand here is like sort of a very highly developed systems that aren't dependent on like how well an individual went and negotiated at the beginning of their job, and then transparency. I mean, and so and in terms of like what's going to scale across an organization from 4 people to 40 to 400, like those are the two things. And the other thing worth thinking about, right, is as we all wrestle with this, we're like, what does it mean to have a pay ratio of low tax pay ratio of 1 to 4? Like, I think for most people on the stage, that doesn't exist in any organization here, and that would just result in like agony. Like 1 to 4 is 2 orders of magnitude better than an American corporation does. And so if you have to go to 1 to 4, it's probably, it's like philosophically, you're so much closer to where we all want to be than anything else. Than a corporation, it's okay, I think.
Well, and I think the other thing, I mean, my husband asked that same question when we were having this conversation earlier this week, and I was thinking through what we were going to be talking about. And he's like, well, something that I see in the work, how did he put it? Something like, are you talking about democratization or are you talking about greater inclusiveness? And to me, I mean, it was just kind of like an interesting conversation. Like, what's the difference between flattening all hierarchy or being more inclusive in decision-making and other processes, but not necessarily leveling all the hierarchies? And I think that you had mentioned that too. And I thought that was like kind of an interesting kind of non-folklore perspective from an MPA, like some of the things that you would like bring to that conversation.
I have a question. It's about motivation.
Oh, can you want to do
Do I have to?
Perfectly set up, yeah.
We'll hear you better.
It's about motivation. To me, I think our society is based on motivation. You do things, you go to college because you can get a better job. You get a better job, you make more money. So if we level the playing field, I mean, why should someone who is director of an organization, why should he be there? What's going to motivate people to move up in their lives? Because it's not just about money, it's also about moving up in your life and what motivates you to move up in your life. So that's, my question is, what about motivation?
That's a great question. I think that's something that I've been thinking about with my staff a lot as we've been leveling these salaries, and also, like, it's such a small organization that there's not really the ability to move up in the organization. We're trying to dismantle hierarchy that's built into how we communicate and function as a group, so there's not really like an aspiration in our staff to become a supervisor or become have a position where you're gaining some of the skills that are understood as valuable if you were to leave that structure and go into a different one. So we've been I don't have the right answers for any of this, but we've been thinking a lot about professional development opportunities, particularly working with this aorta collective that we keep mentioning to further people's understanding and facility with anti-oppressive methodologies for doing our work. We've also been thinking about, different opportunities to work with, allied fields and others in our own communities. So people are developing kind of facility working outside of folklore organizations, and they're finding that valuable. But I think opening up the opportunity to name, like in our points of unity, why it is that we do this work, and then to continuously revisit that and say, we fulfilled one of our points of unity by taking on this new project, which is that we say that care for ourselves and others nourishes us, right? And so that the motivation to nourish oneself can be an expectation at work, and making that an explicit part of participating on the staff has been, I think, motivating to my current staff. But it's always a question also is that when somebody new comes on, first of all, will any of these points of unity resonate with them, and do we make that a requirement to join the staff? How does that change my hiring practices, the kinds of questions that I ask during an interview?
But then you're no longer being inclusive.
What's that?
Then you're no longer being inclusive. You're being...
Well, right, and then do we revise these when someone new comes? This is lots and lots of questions, and I'm not really sure, but I think some of the motivation is that there was that opportunity to articulate who we are and how we personally connect to the work, and then to check in that our work continuously is connecting to those motivations.
Yeah, and I think it's a great thing to bring up, because I haven't thought about it in the way you articulated it, you know? Because for me, it's about, if there's a contrast, right? Before, I had zero motivation. I had little say in what happened. I was not paid very well to begin with. And I was reaching a point of like, well, I'm just gonna come here and do my job, right? I'll do the thing I'm paid to do, and that'll be it. Nothing more, nothing less. And then suddenly the motivation became, wow, I'm part of the process, you know? I actually have a say in how things work, you know? And like the decisions aren't being made arbitrarily behind a closed door anymore, because if the door's closed, most of us are on the other side of it. So, but that's, I mean, that worked for me, you know, and that worked for everybody. One of my colleagues, you know, he buys it, but at the same time, he's like, you know, I think, that, you know, I don't know if he started with, this is going to sound bad, but you know, but it's like, the way I want to live, I can't live on the amount of money I'm making. I can make money working, more money working part-time here and doing freelance work on the side, and that's what I'd like to do. And that was a choice he made, and we supported it, you know, because that's what kept him happy, you know, and we wanted him to stay involved in the organization because the work he does for us is excellent. But yeah, it's a thorny question, and it's this, to me, I get mired in this notion of kind of utopian thinking, right? Where I'm like, we're creating a collectivist socialist utopia, and everyone is motivated by the fact that we're all working together for a common future. But that's not true for everyone, you know, nor is it necessarily true for the long term.
Well, and I think that's part of the question. What does success look like?
Yeah.
How do you define success? If your child comes to you and says, you know, Mommy, I want to be a folklorist, like, how do you handle that question? You know, and so what is the value of that work? What are the motivating things? Clearly, from hearing us speak, it's not the money. But then, like, I mean, I saw Vera walk in, and I was like, oh, this is part of why I love doing this work. I mean, working with artists that are amazing and fabulous and make our communities richer and personally touch us in the work that we do. You know, like, that's, I think, a part of, like, what success looks like for me. How do I stay motivated? Sometimes that's a harder question on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's part of why I keep asking this question about, like, peer-to-peer networks and mentoring and feeling like you have a good sense of, like, who colleagues are, especially for folklorists that are working individually or in very small organizations. They might feel isolated. How do we best kind of create an apparatus that we can feel like we have a network of somebody that gets it? They get that we're not here for the money, but, you know, on those days we're like, oh, it's not coming together the way I needed to or wanted to or thought it would. You know, where's the support network for that? Would maybe be a different way of kind of asking that question.
Yeah, another thing from a salary perspective, and this certainly doesn't apply to everyone, it applies to me. My wife gets paid twice what I make to do her job, so I'm in a privileged position to be able to earn less. You know, I mean, that's sort of true, right? She's a tenured academic. So I'm in a position where our family doesn't suffer from me taking a moral stand like this, particularly where we live, the cost of living.
So your motivation is then your wife's salary?
Well, my motivation is to make sure my wife stays employed. That's my primary motivation. You know, no, I mean, for me, like, seriously though, I mean, like, what's my motivation? It's that I love what I do and being able to find opportunities that I get really excited about. You know, I mean, like, there are days I'm like, I can't believe this is my freaking job. You know, I can't believe someone's paying me to do this. You know, and that for me, that's really a motivation. To love what you do and to not feel like it sucks. A lot of the times it sucks, but then you're like, wow, I'm actually sitting here talking about making comic books for migrant workers' narratives with people who understand that the storytellers themselves have to be part of the process of making those stories. And I can call that work. You know, that's exciting, you know, so.
I just wanted to contribute a hypothetical, and I thought maybe it would be a way to tease out some practical kinds of information about some of these other possibilities, without, you know, assuming that this is a utopian proposition. Let's just say, hypothetically, that a bunch of folklorists wanted to get together and they wanted to form a worker co-op to do the work that we do in New York City. For those folks who have some experience with this network and some of the funding that's available to do that, I mean, I've gotten a little, a few hints about how this works based on some co-ops I've heard about in New York City, like up in the Bronx, there's the Green Worker Co-op, and they incubate other worker co-ops fairly quickly. And I got the impression that it was kind of an easy thing to do, and maybe that's not the case. And then the other part of it is another hypothetical. Let's just say a bunch of folklorists in New York City wanted to get together and form a union. And how does that happen, and how would that work?
Well, I mean, I think what's worth, one important thing to know is that in the last year, New York City, or last 2 years, through some funding from City Council, New York City has functionally dedicated as much money as the national government to cooperative development, which is very interesting. And I was happy to be part of making that first year that funding happen. And what's that done is really fund a network of cooperative developers around the city focused on making it easier for employees to own the businesses in which they work. And so that ranges from everything from sort of the Green Worker, this organization called Green Worker Co-ops that runs how to start a worker cooperative, sort of 8 to 12-week courses in the Bronx, and similar organizations that do so called the Working World, that do so in New York City, or sort of in the city more broadly. And so the best place to go to sort of hear about those sorts of things is the New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives. And they're an information distribution point and general resource. They just hired some new staff that's fantastic with the city money. It's pretty great. Though it's also worth noting, right, that to start a worker cooperative, you're starting two things, one of which is a business, or one of which is a cooperative that's sort of accountable to its employees, and allows employees to design the work structure in which they want to work. The second thing you're starting is a business. And so I would just emphasize that you need to have your market and your business plan scoped out. And that sometimes that business, and I wouldn't often encourage people to start a not-for-profit, but sometimes that business really does come through government contracts or government grants. And so you can really design, with the exception of sort of taking away the profits, you can design what is functionally a worker cooperative inside of a 501c3 structure, which is something that the ICA group, icagroup.org.coop, I don't remember their, but you could find them online. They're based out of Boston, actually. And so they've really perfected that. And so that you could get guidance from any of those organizations. But I would say the very first thing to do is to find some support both for your business planning and for your cooperative development. And then, as you've heard these folks say, it's quite a lot of work to start a participatory, non-hierarchical structure. And in some ways it's easier, and so you're doing two things, right? You're starting a cooperative and you're starting a worker cooperative. You're also starting a business. I always encourage people to do one at a time. And if that means like your three friends get together and start a business, and you hire a couple of people for 2 years. And then you grow to about 6 people, and you've 6 solid full-time staff, and your business feels good. Then you can go back to the cooperative side and say, all right, so we've been a cooperative with 3 worker owners and some employees. Now let's really spend some time developing the cooperative while the business doesn't run on automatic, but it runs on like a little bit more solid footing. Don't trying to do both at once, or you can get really solid as a group of as a group of 6, and say we're going to spend a year and a half getting our plan ready and getting our business plan ready and getting our cooperative ready, and being really comfortable working together as a group. And then we're going to start to expect 3 years later to have 6 full-time equivalent staff, and therefore we've all made other plans for how we make money for the next 3 years, and we're just starting the cooperative, and then we're really focusing on the business. But the idea that you can start a cooperative and start a business and be making full-time work inside of a year or in 2 years is challenging. It's not impossible, but it's certainly challenging. But the New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives has there's an increasingly developed funders network, or a network of loans and sort of capital and raising, and a network of technical assistance. So people can definitely tap into that. Though again, that's interesting is that a lot of that money is focused, a lot of that energy is focused on democratizing wealth. So I'm just warning you up front that you could, talking to the Toolbox for Education and Social Action that shares a lot of the values of folklorist and democratic education. Talking to Aorta, also a great resource. A lot of the work for cooperative people in New York are focused on how do we build wealth in immigrant communities and build businesses in immigrant communities. So sometimes it's a little hard to get attention as like three white people coming to start a cooperative. I definitely, you will get help, but you will not get like intensive help. Just to be honest.
I just want to comment that from working with Joe and listening to him talk about cooperatives, one of the cooperatives, Joe, that you introduced me to that I think is a really interesting model for arts and artwork for people in the arts and culture is the Meerkat Collective, which is the multimedia cooperative, because they work together to do, like, they make big scale documentaries together, but they make to make money, they make like corporate videos, and they all work as media specialists, but then together as like an art collective, they make these amazing documentaries. And so it's an interesting, it's a somewhat more arty version, and that's I think an interesting. And I know they started out as a collective, not a cooperative, right?
Yeah, they're Meerkat Collective. They're a fantastic worker-owned cooperative, but they make you might have seen Brasslands, which is a documentary about Balkan brass bands. It's fantastic. But they fund that work, so they interestingly set aside. They could take home. They do corporate work mostly. They set aside a portion of that corporate work and pay themselves less than like corporate market rates, so that they can make documentaries together and fund more interesting work with the corporate work. And so and that's an important function and tool of a cooperative, is the ability to not just like, oh, I'm going to go in and pay myself more up front, or pay myself the maximum amount that I can get and still run the business, but actually to pay yourself a little less and to invest some of it in the work that you want to do, or the work we always encourage people to, or I encourage people to invest in the long-term and the medium-term economic institutions that will allow your business and other businesses to change the economic landscape. In terms of democratizing the economy or democratizing even nonprofits, we've got to change the economic landscape by buying it out. Like, and it's the pleasant situation is that we have to buy out the economy from the people who are investing in it for profit, and invest in it instead for the purpose of meeting our needs as people. And that means buying things like real estate, and buying things like buildings, and the ability to produce larger and larger things, buying more and more recording devices and ability to make websites. And I think that's an amazing place, actually, I will just say, in terms of building cross-sectoral alliances. And I'll let you talk a little bit about the union and starting a union in a cultural institution. But one thing, that the way that you make a bond of solidarity across unions and artists actually is for unions to invest in artists in the artistic economy. And specifically, there's a long history of unions investing in housing. And if you could think, you could imagine a world in which folklorists live in limited equity housing cooperatives with housing set aside for folklorists, and then they do folklore organizations work with the unions, and what that would take is for unions to free up a little bit of their pension fund money and to invest it in New York City real estate.
But, I think if you had a group of folklorists or people in the arts that wanted to get together and form a union, I mean, you have to consider what your purpose is, because to me, the most important, what would be most logical for bringing together a group of people who work in the arts, you've talked about one sector of the arts, would be, if people were serious about this, targeting institutions, I mean, especially New York, targeting the institutions that should be unionized. And going after them institution by institution, because unionization is still centered for the most part in collective bargaining with an employer, between employees and employer. There are some exceptions, obviously, and there are unions that have tackled that. I mean, you clearly, like in the entertainment unions, the structure of the industry is a lot different. So those unions have gone out and captured the talent and then can negotiate with the variety of employers that are out there in the field to, you know, they have enough critical mass to force employers to hire unionized workers. And the business is all set up as, you know, projects and, you know, not as permanent employment. And construction similarly. And we have, in our union, we have the National Writers Union, which is a sister local of freelance writers, and clearly, you know, the end goal of that is to try to capture the talent, you know, get enough freelance writers in the union that you actually have the bargaining power. But I have to say they're tremendously far away from being there. I mean, the unions existed for 20 years, and you know, they have virtually no collective bargaining at all. So it's still like a very long way away. And it seems to me that if you're looking at people who work in the arts, you know, there is that question, could you somehow organize people into a group and that could have power simply by their being organized into a group? And, you know, I mean, adjunct organizing has tried to do that. I mean, there are a lot of visions of adjunct organizing as being citywide, nationwide, et cetera, rather than, you know, employer-wide. But I would not preclude, you know, trying to organize employers, especially because there are so many cultural institutions and arts institutions that are unorganized. So I would see value in people, and there is a community out there. I was saying to somebody during the break, we just had a contract negotiations at the Museum of Modern Art, and it was very contentious negotiations, and we actually ended up with getting a lot of press and publicity about, because it looked like we were going to go on strike, even though we didn't, and we had a rally, and I was amazed at there was sort of a community out there that responded to the contract negotiations, you know, online, et cetera, that had a huge interest in it. People who worked in other institutions, people who hoped to work in, you know, other institutions, et cetera. So, you know, it is possible you could tap into a broad group of people. And if people were serious, they could look at the institutions that within, you know, within the area and say, let's unionize some of these institutions.
Two questions, sort of piggybacking off of things we're talking about. The first is just in terms of thinking about unionizing or making changes in an existing organization where there's a collective desire for change, but it's not a new organization. So, for example, you do have a historic board of directors situation or certain people in power that it's, you know, you're not going to just dismantle it and you're not going to just walk in with a new idea and it's going to be great. What are some reasonable practices that staff can use in the workplace to sort of begin this conversation, I guess is one question I have. And the other is something that I just wanted to return to in thinking about, you were talking about different ways of restructuring a nonprofit or a public sector organization that are more sustainable. And then we're also having this conversation about the way we're set up now, regardless of the structure of our organizations, in terms of funding and access to resources, people are only able to make a certain amount in general, and that does often preclude certain people from doing these jobs. Or if you do them and you're not in a situation where it's possible, you become sort of it's a martyr situation where you're hurting quite a lot to do it in certain ways, whether it's you personally or your family or whatever the case may be. And I just wanted to know if some of these other structures that we're talking about, I mean, from the top down, I mean, how do we get to a place where, for example, I've been asked at least 6 times in my adult professional life about a very serious job, are you in a position to work for free? I mean, that's a question in the interview. So how do we get to a place where that's not the question, I guess? I love these structures. I just want to know which one of them, or if all of them, you know, what do you guys think moving forward is, in your impression, and a good way to go, so that we don't have situations where that happens? Or, for example, I have an intern who says to me, Naomi, I love what you do, but I would never do your job, because look at how you live, right? I mean, that's very sad when you're a teacher and you're teaching. I mean, obviously that person is not necessarily going into folklore. They have that choice, but they're looking at that and they're saying, I don't want that to be my job, even though I really respect what you do. And so I'm just wondering if these are the real issues. How do we change, I guess, some of these resources from the top to change that?
Well, I mean, I don't know what organization you work for, but if you are an employee of that organization, and there are multiple employees, and you want to challenge the power structure, you have to be thinking about, unionization. Because unless you are already part of the management structure and actually have some authority to say, we are going to revise things, or you have like a very unique situation where, you have like an extremely progressive board that is open to these ideas to begin with, you'll get fired if you come in and say, well, we want to turn this into a worker cooperative. If the